I have told this story exactly once before to a man who did not believe me, and I think that disbelief is the only reason I am still able to say the words at all. Belief makes a thing real. Doubt keeps it at arm's length where you can survive looking at it. So if you are listening to this, and you decide I am lying, I won't blame you. I might even thank you. We found the bunker on the 11th day, though by then we had stopped trusting numbers. My name is Cora Vega, and at the time I was the youngest of 6 people who had survived the collapse of a town that no longer has a name worth saying. I was 22. I want you to understand that age because everything that happened to me in that bunker happened to someone who had never once been believed about anything important in her life. The others called me the kid, not cruelly, just automatically, the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room you've lived in too long. There was Halverson, broad and slow-speaking, who had been a county road foreman and acted like the rest of us were potholes he hadn't gotten around to filling. There was Priya, a pharmacist, precise and quiet, who counted everything twice. Her husband, Devon, who laughed too loud when he was scared and went silent when he wasn't. An older woman named Ruth, who prayed under her breath in a language I never identified. And me. We had been walking the ridge line above the reservoir because Halverson swore the high ground would be clear of the infected. He was right about that, mostly. The dead didn't climb well. What he was wrong about was everything underneath the ground. I saw the door before anyone else. That part matters too. I was the one who saw it, and I was the one nobody listened to. And those two facts braided together into the rope that eventually hanged us. It was set into a hillside, framed by a low concrete lip that the rain had stained the color of old teeth. A blast door, steel, painted a green that had gone gray. The kind of thing you'd walk past 100 times thinking it was a culvert or a forgotten utility access. But I stopped because the door was open. Not blown open. Not pried. Open the way a refrigerator's open when someone meant to close it and didn't. "Down here," I called, and my voice cracked. And Devon laughed his scared laugh. Halverson came down the slope sideways, planting his boots. He stood in front of the door for a long moment, and I watched him decide it was good news. I watched the relief loosen his shoulders. Shelter. Steel walls. High ground and a hole in the earth. But I was still looking at the door itself, at the heavy locking wheel in its center, at the bolts that ran the perimeter like knuckles. And something was wrong with all of it, something I couldn't say yet because I didn't have the words and wouldn't have been believed if I had. "We're not the first ones here," I said. Halverson didn't turn around. "Long gone. Look at the dust." "That's not what I mean." He finally looked at me then, with the patient face adults use right before they stop listening. "Then what do you mean, kid?" I didn't answer. Because the answer was insane, and I knew it, and I was 22 and tired, and the others were already filing past me into the dark with their flashlights swinging. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself a lot of things in those first minutes, and every one of them was a small door I was closing on the truth, the same way someone had failed to close the one in front of me. We went inside. That was the choice. Everything after it only looked like a choice. The air changed the moment we crossed the threshold. Outside, it had smelled like wet pine and the sweetish rot we'd all stopped noticing weeks ago. Inside, it smelled like a coin held too long in a warm hand. Metal and skin. Priya noticed it first. She put her sleeve to her mouth without comment, which from Priya was a scream. The entry was a short tunnel of corrugated steel that opened into a stairwell going down. Halverson led with the good flashlight. I came last, which is where the kid always goes. And I kept turning to look at the door behind us, framing the gray daylight smaller and smaller as we descended. "Pull it shut?" Devon asked from somewhere ahead. Leave it, Halverson said, until we know what's down here. The stairs ended at a landing, and the landing ended at a second door, this one inner, lighter, already standing open like the first. Beyond it, the beams found a room that made all of us go quiet in the particular way that means hope. Bunks, shelving, crates, stenciled with numbers, a long table, a kitchen alcove with a hand pump at the sink. Someone had built this place to outlast the world, and for a moment, I felt the same warmth I'd seen loosen Halverson's shoulders, and I hated myself a little for feeling it. Generator, Halverson said the way a starving man says bread. Priya was already at the shelves, reading labels with her flashlight. Canned, sealed, water drums. There's a med locker. She said the last part softly, like she was afraid to want it. Ruth lowered herself onto the nearest bunk and closed her eyes, and her lips began to move. I should have felt relief. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the room with my light, because I couldn't stop thinking about the door. 2 doors, actually. The outer blast door and this inner one. Both open, both undamaged. And here's the thing I finally understood. Standing in that warm metal coin of a room while my people laughed quietly over crates of food. A bunker like this is built to keep things out. Every hinge, every bolt, every wheel and seal is designed to be controlled from the inside. The locks were on our side of the doors, which meant nobody had broken in. Somebody had opened it. From in here. On purpose. And walked out, or been taken out, leaving it gaping behind them. Halverson, I said. These doors, they lock from inside, both of them. Somebody opened this place up themselves. He was crouched by a steel cabinet, prying it. Maybe they left. Then why leave it open? You'd seal it behind you. You'd take the safest thing in the world, and you'd close it. My voice was doing the cracking thing again. Nobody leaves a door like this open, unless they wanted something to be able to get in. For a second, the room was perfectly still. I had said the unsayable, and I watched it land on each of them differently. Devon's laugh didn't come. Priya's hand stopped on the shelf. Ruth's prayer paused, and Halverson stood up slowly, his knees cracking, and looked at me with something I had never gotten from him before, which was attention. Then he chose not to keep it. I watched him do it. Or, he said, somebody panicked, ran, and didn't think. People aren't careful when they're dying, kid. You'll learn that. He turned back to the cabinet. We close it now. Problem solved. We're tired. We eat. We sleep. We're alive. And the worst part is that he was being kind. He wanted the simple answer because the simple answer let us rest. I wanted to argue, but I was the kid. And the bunks were soft, and somewhere behind my fear was an exhaustion, so deep it felt like gravity. So I let it go. I let him close the door. I heard the wheel turn and the bolts seat with a sound like a jaw clicking shut. And I told myself we were safe. We were never less safe than in that moment. I didn't sleep that first night, not really. The others did eventually, the way animals do when the predator's scent has faded. Devon snoring, Priya curled against him, Ruth on her back with her hands folded, Halverson in a chair by the door with the flashlight off to save it. The bunker had a darkness unlike any I'd known. Above ground, even on the worst nights, there was sky. Down here, the dark had a thickness, a pressure against the eyes. I lay in my bunk and listened. And the more I listened, the more I became certain the bunker was not empty. It is hard to describe how you know another living thing shares a space with you when you cannot see or hear it clearly. It is older than reason. The hair on your arms knows before your mind admits it. I lay there and felt watched, and I told myself it was the dark, the fear, the new place strangeness. But underneath the silence there was a rhythm that was not my own breathing. Slower, deliberate. coming, I thought, from beyond the far wall, where my flashlight had picked out a third door earlier, a smaller one, painted the same dead green that nobody had opened because it was locked, and we'd been too tired to wonder why. A locked inner door in a bunker someone had opened from inside. I got up. I am not brave. I want that on record. I got up because I could not lie still with a question that large pressing on my chest. I took the small flashlight Priya had given me, and I crossed the room, stepping over Ruth's folded shoes, and I put my hand flat against that third door. It was warm. Not the warmth of the room. Warmer. The warmth of something on the other side. And as my palm rested there, the slow rhythm I'd been hearing changed. It paused. The way breathing pauses when a sleeper realizes they are no longer alone. Then very softly, from the other side, came 3 sounds. Not knocks, taps, fingernails maybe, drawn down the steel, patient, almost gentle. I did not scream, which surprised me. I backed away 1 step at a time until my spine hit a bunk frame, and I stood there in the dark with my heart trying to climb out of my mouth, and I made a decision that I have turned over in my hands every day since. I decided not to wake them. I told myself it was because they wouldn't believe me. The kid, hearing things in the dark on her first night underground. Halverson would say it was pipes. Priya would say it was the structure settling. They would all look at me with that patient, adult face, and the believing would not come. And I would have spent my credibility on a sound I couldn't prove. So I would wait. I would gather evidence. I would be sure before I spoke. That was a lie, I told myself, and I knew it even then. The truth was simpler and worse. I didn't wake them because part of me did not want to be the one who turned this warm, safe room back into a place of fear. I had felt the relief on their faces. I had wanted to keep it for them a little longer. I had wanted, for once, to be the one who let people rest. So I sat against the bunk frame and watched the third door until the dark stopped pressing and the others began to stir in what the watch said was morning. Though morning meant nothing now, and the taps did not come again. By the time Halverson lit the lantern and the room filled with that yellow living light, I had almost convinced myself I dreamed it. Almost. That word has done more damage in my life than any monster. I built our coming destruction on the back of the word almost, and I served it to the people I loved with a smile and told them good morning. By the third day below, the bunker had become a kind of home, which is the most dangerous thing a trap can become. Halverson got the generator coughing to life, and with it came lights, real steady electric light, that drove the thick dark back into the corners and made the third door look like nothing. Just a door, just steel. In the light, it was easy to believe in pipes and settling. Light is a story we tell ourselves about safety. Priya inventoried everything. She was magnificent at it, the small, precise woman, moving down the shelves with a notebook she'd found, recording cans and drums, and the contents of the med locker in her cramped, careful hand. 40 days, she announced at the long table. If we're careful, maybe 60. There's antibiotics. There's water for longer than the food. She said it like a prayer of her own, and Devon kissed her temple, and Ruth said amen, and Halverson nodded the slow, approving nod of a man who has filled a pothole. I sat at the end of the table and counted differently. I counted the things that didn't add up. I had found them over 3 days of looking, because I am the kind of person who looks when looking is the last thing she should do. The bunks. 6 of them, but only 4 sets of personal effects, and a 5th that had been stripped down to the mattress, the locker beneath it emptied and wiped. Someone had erased the person. The logbook in the desk drawer, water swollen, its last entries torn out, not lost, torn. the ragged stubs still in the binding, and the med locker Priya loved so much. It was missing things. I knew because the inventory taped inside the door listed sedatives, heavy ones, in quantities that were no longer there. Someone had taken enough to put a large person to sleep for a very long time. I laid these out for Halverson privately by the generator, where the engine noise would cover us. He listened this time. I'll give him that. He'd started listening to me a little since the door, the way you start checking a sound your car makes after it leaves you stranded once. But listening is not the same as believing, and I watched him route every fact I gave him toward the answer he'd already chosen. Survivors, he said. Same as us. They were here, they fought, somebody died. The others took the drugs and the records and they left. That's the open door, Cora, that's all of it. He'd started using my name. I noticed that. You're seeing a ghost story in a sad, ordinary thing. Then where's the body? He didn't answer. You strip a bunk when somebody dies, I said. You don't tear pages out of a log unless there's something in those pages. And you don't take enough sedative to drop a horse unless you were trying to keep something quiet. I thought that's it. Or someone. Halverson's jaw worked. For one moment I saw the foreman's mask slip and something frightened look out at me, and I thought finally he sees it. And then the mask came back down. Because he was responsible for 5 people, and fear was a luxury he had decided he could not afford. Even if you're right, he said. What do you want me to do? Open that locked door and find out? We are safe in here. The whole world is teeth, and we found the one room without any. I'm not going to break it open chasing your bad feeling. He was protecting them. He was protecting all of us in the only way he knew, which was by refusing the question. And the terrible thing is that on day 3, with the lights on and the count at 40 days, he might even have been right. I went back to my bunk and lay facing the 3rd door, and I waited for the taps. They came at the hour the others called night. 3 of them. Patient. And this time, faintly, underneath the taps, I heard something else. A voice. Too low for words, but unmistakably trying to be quiet. I broke on the 4th day. Not loudly. I broke the way ice breaks under a foot before the crack reaches your ears silently. Structurally, all at once and from the inside. What broke me was Ruth. She had taken to sitting near the 3rd door because it was the warmest spot in the room and her old bones felt the cold, and she didn't know what I knew. I came back from the water pump and found her dozing in her chair, her cheek nearly against the warm steel, and I had a vision so sudden and complete that my hands went cold around the bucket. The vision was of the door opening while she slept there, of whatever made the slow, patient breathing reaching out. I set the bucket down too hard and water slopped over the rim, and Ruth woke and smiled at me, and I could not smile back. That was when I understood that my silence had stopped being about credibility. It had become its own kind of choice, renewed every hour I stayed quiet, and every hour the cost of it grew. I had told myself I was waiting for proof. But I had proof now, the taps, the voice, the warmth, the missing sedatives, the stripped bunk. What I was actually waiting for was permission to be believed, and that permission was never coming, because the only one who could grant it was me. So I gathered them at the table, all of them, and I told them everything. I watched it land again, the way the first words had landed days ago, but worse now, because now there was so much more of it, and they had spent 4 days teaching themselves not to feel exactly this. Devon laughed his scared laugh, and it died halfway. Priya went very still, her hand flat on her notebook of comforting numbers. Ruth's face crumpled like wet paper because she had been sleeping against that door, and Halverson stood up so fast his chair fell, and for a second I thought he was going to come across the table at me. But he only stood there with his fists on the wood, breathing. 4 days, he said. You've known for 4 days there might be something behind a door in the room where we sleep. And you said nothing. I told you on the first night the door was wrong. You said pipes. My voice held somehow. I told you about the bunk and the log and the missing drugs. You said survivors. Every time I gave you the truth, you handed me back a story you liked better. So yes, 4 days. Because I learned in 4 days that nothing I say is real to you until it's already happening. It was the cruelest true thing I had ever said, and it was aimed at the man who had been trying, clumsily, to keep me alive. The room absorbed it. Priya looked at her husband, then at Halverson, then at me, doing some private arithmetic. Devon had gone gray, and Ruth, gentle Ruth, stood and walked to the third door and put her ear against it, and we all watched her, and the lantern hissed, and the generator hummed beyond the wall. There's nothing, Halverson started, and then everyone in the room heard it. The taps. 3 of them against Ruth's cheek through the steel, and then the voice, clear now in the held breath of 6 terrified people, a human voice, hoarse from disuse, forming a single broken word that none of us could pretend was pipes or settling or a kid's bad feeling. Please. Ruth jerked back from the door as if it had burned her. Devon's laugh came and went like a hiccup. Priya's hand closed around her notebook hard enough to crease it. And Halverson looked at me, finally, with the believing in his face that I had wanted for 4 days, and I felt no triumph at all. I felt only the cold of the water bucket, and the understanding that being believed too late is its own particular grief. There's someone in there, Priya whispered. Someone alive. Yes, I said. And then the harder part. Someone they locked in, from out here, before they opened the bunker and left. The argument that followed was the realest thing that had happened to us since the world ended. Because for the first time, we were not fighting the dead. We were fighting each other over what kind of people we were going to be. Halverson wanted the door to stay shut. His logic had shifted, but his conclusion hadn't. Someone had locked this person in, taken enough sedative to keep something subdued, torn out the pages that would explain why. You don't seal a man behind steel for nothing, he said. Whoever was here before us made a decision with information we don't have. Maybe he's bitten. Maybe he's turning slow. Maybe that's why the drugs are gone. They were keeping him under until they couldn't anymore, and then they ran. He spread his hands. We opened that door. We might be opening it for the same reason they left it open out there, to let death in. Priya stood with him, but unhappily, because Priya counted. If he were infected, he'd be dead by now, or turned by now, she said. It's been days, weeks maybe, since they left. The infected don't talk. They don't say please. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth. Whatever's in there is still a person, which makes this worse, not better. Devon couldn't speak. He kept looking at the door and away from it. Ruth had begun to pray out loud, the foreign words rolling, and I realized she was praying at the door to whoever was behind it, an apology in a language he wouldn't understand. And me, the kid, the one who'd been right and hated it. They were all looking at me now because I was the one who dragged the truth into the light, which in their eyes made me responsible for what we did with it. That's the trap of being the one who sees. People treat your sight as if it were the cause of the thing you saw. We have to know, I said. We can't just live in here, eating his food, sleeping 10 feet from him, pretending. He said, please, we all heard it. If we leave him in there, then we're not the survivors who found a bunker. We're just the next ones who decided his life was worth less than our comfort. We're them. I pointed at the empty stripped bunk. We become them. And if you're wrong... Halverson's voice wasn't angry anymore. He was tired and frightened and old. If we open it, and it's death, and one of us gets bitten, and it spreads in a sealed room with no way to run, you'll have killed us all to feel like a good person, Cora. That stopped me. Because it was possible. Because he was, in his careful, pothole-filling way, doing the math of love, weighing one unknown stranger against 5 known souls, and coming out where any rational man would. I had no answer that was certain. There was no certain answer. There was only the pleas still hanging in the air, and the choice of which kind of regret we could live with. We talk to him first, I said finally. Through the door. We don't open it. We ask him who he is and why they locked him in. If he's what you're afraid of, he won't be able to answer like a person. And if he can answer like a person, then we'll know we sealed a man in the dark, and we'll have to decide what that makes us. Even Halverson couldn't argue with that. It was a door we could open without opening the door. So we gathered around the warm green steel, 6 of us, in the lantern light, and Halverson looked at me because I was the one who heard him first, and so it had to be me. And I put my mouth near the seam where the metal met the frame, and I said, "We hear you. We're not going to hurt you. Tell us your name." The silence on the other side was so long that Devon started to turn away. And then the hoarse voice came, careful, rationing itself like Priya ration cans. "Elias," it said. "My name is Elias. Don't let them tell you what I am. Let me tell you what they did." Elias talked to us through the door for the better part of what we were calling a day, and I have never since heard a human being work so hard to sound sane. That effort itself was unbearable to listen to. A man who is simply sane does not labor at it. A man laboring at it has learned somewhere that his sanity is on trial. He told us he had built the bunker, not alone with 3 others in the slow years before the world turned. The way some men build boats they'll never sail. A prepper, we would have called him once, with the little sneer that word used to carry. He said the name like he knew we'd sneer. There had been 4 of them when the outbreak came, and they sealed the doors. Elias, a man named Pell, and a married couple, the Reyeses. They had food for a year. They had water and medicine and light. They had done everything right. And then, Elias said, we found out the thing nobody plans for. It isn't the dead that gets you in a sealed room. It's the living. It's what people decide about each other when the door won't open and the food has a number on it. Priya flinched at that. She had been the one counting cans. He told us how it started small. A disagreement over rations. Pell, he said, was the one who'd put up the money for most of the supplies. And Pell came to believe slowly, then all at once, that this entitled him to more. To decide. To rule the little kingdom under the hill. The Reyeses sided with Pell because Pell controlled the count, and a hungry person sides with whoever holds the spoon. And Elias, who had drawn the plans and welded the doors with his own hands, found himself outvoted in his own creation. "It didn't kill me," he said, and his hoarse voice did something then that I'll never forget. It tried to laugh, and couldn't. Killing me would have made them murderers, and people who count cans can't stand to think of themselves as murderers. So they did the arithmetic instead. They decided I used too much, ate too much, breathed too much, took up a bunk. They sedated me. That's where your missing drugs went, girl. I heard you talking about them through the wall, and when I woke up, I was in the storage room. This room. And the door was locked from your side. I looked at the others. Priya had gone white. Ruth's lips were moving. Halverson stared at the floor. They rationed me, Elias went on. Slid food onto the gap when they remembered. Forgot when it suited them. Told themselves I was still part of the count, that they were keeping me alive, that this was mercy, and maybe at first it was. But you can't feed a man through a crack in a door and keep thinking of him as a man. He becomes a number that eats, and a number that eats is a problem to be solved. What happened to them? Halverson asked, and his voice was not the foreman's anymore. Silence. Then, I don't know. One day the food stopped. The voices stopped. I heard the big door open, heard the wheel, heard the bolts, heard the daylight. I swear I could hear the daylight. And I screamed myself bloody and nobody came. They left. Took the records so no one would know what they'd done. Took the drugs in case they needed to do it to someone else. And they left both doors open behind them and left me sealed in the dark behind the only door they bothered to lock. He stopped. The generator hummed. They opened the bunker from inside, I said, understanding it fully now, the thing I'd known on the first night without the words. Not to let death in, to let themselves out. And leaving it open was just they didn't care anymore. The bunker had stopped being a thing worth saving. I had it backwards. We all did. That night, and it was night truly by then, the generator off to save fuel, the dark gone thick again, we did not sleep, and we did not open the door, and we sat in the worst kind of company, which is the company of a decision you cannot agree on. Because Halverson still would not be moved, and now his reasons were harder to hate, because they had grown a layer of compassion over them. Say every word of it is true, he said into the dark, his voice disembodied, just a man's reason floating in a room with no light. Say they did exactly that to him. It's monstrous. I believe it. But Cora, the man in there, has been sealed alone in the dark for weeks, maybe months. No light, no voice. Rationed food, then no food. You know what that does to a mind. You've seen what hunger and dark do to people who started out whole. A pause. He may have been a man when they shut that door. I'm asking you to consider that the door might not have a man behind it anymore. Just the shape of one. They learned to say please because please used to work. It was a horrible thing to say, and it was not stupid. That was the trap of the whole bunker. Every cruel option had a kind face, and every kind option had teeth. Then we're doing to him exactly what they did, I said. We're deciding what he is so we don't have to find out. We're filling in the blank with the answer that lets us keep our 40 days of food and our soft bunks. Halverson. That strip bed. We've been sleeping next to it like it's furniture. Somebody slept there. Somebody erased him. And now we're about to erase the last one left. By doing nothing, which is the most comfortable way to erase a man there is. Priya's voice came out of the dark, small. I keep thinking about the count, she said. I made us feel safe with the count. 40 days, 60. But that's exactly what Pell had. A count. And the count is what told him another person was too expensive. She drew a shaking breath. I don't want to be a woman who let arithmetic decide who lived. Devon, who almost never spoke, spoke then. If we leave him, he said, I'm never going to be able to sleep in here. Not one night. I'll lie awake listening for the taps like she did. We all will. This stops being a shelter. It starts being a thing we did. His scared laugh tried to come and didn't. I'd rather die outside than live in a place I'm haunting myself." Ruth said nothing in words. She got up in the dark. I heard the chair, the slow, careful movement of her old body, and she crossed to the third door and she knocked. 3 times, gently. An answer to the taps, and from the other side, after a moment, came 3 taps back, and a sound that might have been weeping, and Ruth said in English for once, so we'd all understand, "We hear you, child. We have not gone." In the dark, I felt the decision shift. Not toward certainty, there was none, but toward the kind of regret we'd chosen to be able to live with. Even Halverson's breathing changed. Reason had lost, or rather, a deeper reason had won. The one that knows a shelter you've damned yourself to keep is not a shelter at all. "In the morning," Halverson said at last, the word dragged out of him. "Lights on. Everyone behind me. We crack it slow, and Cora." His voice found me in the black. "You're the one he trusts. You talk him through it. God help us all." I lay awake the rest of that night, not afraid of the door for the first time, afraid instead of being wrong in front of the only people I had left. We opened the door in the morning, by which I mean we opened it in the artificial dawn of the generator and the lantern. All the light we had pooled and aimed at the third door like we could push back whatever came out with brightness alone. Halverson worked the lock. It was a simple slide bolt on our side, almost insultingly simple, the kind of thing you'd put on a pantry, and the casualness of it was its own horror. They hadn't even needed a real lock. A man can be erased with a pantry bolt if enough people agree not to slide it back. "Elias," I said through the steel, "we're opening it now. Move back from the door. Sit down, against the far wall, hands where we can see them. Not because we don't trust you, because they're scared, and I need them to see you're not what they're scared of. Can you do that for me?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. "Thank you for telling me what you need. Nobody's told me what they need in a long time. They only told me what I was." That sentence is the one that undid Halverson, I think. I saw his hand pause on the bolt. Then he slid it and pulled, and the door came open on a darkness deeper than the rooms, exhaling that warm coin and skin smell, magnified to something that made Devon gag. The lantern light went in. Elias sat against the far wall, exactly as I'd asked, and he was a man. That was the first and most important thing, and it broke something open in all of us to see it. He was only a man, terribly thin, his skin gone the gray of the unlit, his eyes streaming and clamped half shut against light he hadn't seen in weeks, his hands raised, palms out, and shaking. Not snarling, not lunging, squinting and weeping and holding himself as still as he could because a girl through a door had told him it would help. "I'm not going to move," he said to the light, blind in it. "I'm going to stay right here. You can look as long as you need." Priya made a sound I had never heard a person make. Ruth began to pray, and this time it sounded like thanks. And Halverson, the foreman, who had wanted so badly to keep the door shut, who had done the math of love and gotten it wrong and almost right. Halverson lowered the lantern and crossed the threshold first, ahead of all of us, and crouched in front of the man he'd nearly left in the dark and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." We brought Elias out into the main room. We gave him water in careful sips, because Priya knew what too much would do to a starved body. We wrapped him in blankets. He flinched at the open space, at the size of the room, at the 6 of us. And I understood that we had not rescued him into safety. We had only moved him into a larger, gentler cage, and that healing him would be a longer labor than freeing him. And for a while, an hour, maybe 2, it was the closest thing to grace I had felt since the world fell. We had found the trap and refused it. We had been handed the easy cruelty and chosen the hard mercy. 6 strangers in a hole in the earth had decided, against arithmetic and against fear, that a man's life weighed more than their comforts. I let myself believe for that hour that the story was over, and that mercy had been the whole of it. I was 22. I still believe stories ended where the kindness was. It was Elias himself who ended that hour, and the way he did it taught me the cruelest lesson the bunker had to teach, which is that you can do the right thing for the right reasons and still not have done a safe thing. He was sipping water, steadier now, the light less of an assault, and he looked around the room slowly, taking inventory the way a man does of a home he built, and his eyes stopped on the big blast door, the outer one, the one Halverson had wheeled shut and bolted on our first night. "You closed it," he said. "First night," Halverson said. "Sealed it tight. Safest thing we could do." And Elias went very still, and the small, fragile piece we'd built drained out of his face. "How long?" he said. "How long has it been sealed?" 4 days. 5. Priya counting. Always counting. Elias closed his eyes. "Then it's already happened," he said, and his voice was not afraid. It was worse than afraid. It was certain. Pell and the Reyeses. They didn't leave because they wanted to. The food was running short. That's why they cut mine off first. They left to scavenge, to find more and bring it back. That's why they left both doors open. Not because they stopped caring. He opened his eyes and they were wet. Because they were coming back. They left it open so they could get back in fast, with their arms full, without stopping to work the wheel. The room went cold. "They've been out there for weeks," Halverson said slowly. "Scavenging, in that. Some of them, maybe, are still out there," Elias said. "Still alive, still looking. Or—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I understood it before he said the rest. The way I'd understood the door on the first night, the cold knowledge arriving ahead of the words. "You think they came back," I said, "while we were down here. You think they came back to an open door and found it sealed from inside. By us. And couldn't get in," Elias said. "And had nowhere to go. And whatever's out there found them at their own threshold, locked out of their own bunker by strangers." He looked at the blast door as if he could see through it. "Or they're out there right now, standing at the door of the only safe place in the world that they built that won't open, listening to us breathe through the steel." His thin hands closed on the blanket. "The way I listened to you, sir." Nobody spoke. The symmetry of it sat in the room like a seventh person. We had freed the man locked in, and in doing so learned that we ourselves were the ones who had locked others out, that on our very first night, in our reach for safety, we had become the Pells of someone else's story. The arithmetic had a second column none of us had seen. "We have to open it," I heard myself say. "We have to look." And Halverson, who 5 days ago wanted every door shut forever, did not argue. Because there was no version of us that could keep eating these cans and sleeping in these bunks while a question that large stood at the door. We had learned that lesson behind the third door and learned it too well to unlearn it now. He went to the wheel. He set his hands on it, and he looked back at all of us, at Elias wrapped in his blanket, at Priya and her ruined count, at Ruth praying, at Devon, at me, the kid who heard things in the dark, and he said, "Whatever's out there, we don't seal it back out without knowing what it is. We don't do to them what we almost did to him." And he turned the wheel. The wheel turned with a groan that I felt in my teeth, and the bolts drew back, one by one, knuckle, 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 and Halverson pulled the blast door inward on its heavy hinges, and the world we had sealed ourselves away from breathed in at us through the widening gap. It was night outside. Of course it was night. We had lost all sense of the sun. Cold air poured down the steel tunnel, real air, moving air, smelling of pine and frost, and underneath it, the sweet rot we'd forgotten. After 5 days of the coin-warm dark, that cold living air was almost unbearable, like grief, like memory. And in the gray spill of our lantern light up the tunnel, at the very threshold where the steel met the night, there was a shape. It had been a man. I made myself look at it the way I had made myself look at everything in that bunker, because looking was the only honest thing I knew how to do. It had been a man, and now it was the slow, patient thing the dead became, and it stood at the open door, swaying, turning toward the light and the warmth and the sound of us with that terrible, unhurried attention. On the ground around it were others, 2 more, that had stopped being able to stand. They had been here a long time. They had been here, I understood, for days, maybe since our first night, standing at the door of the only safe place in the world that they had built, that wouldn't open, because we had sealed it. "Pell," Elias said from behind me, and his voice broke clean in half. "That's Pell. Oh, God. And the Reyeses. They came back. They came back, and it was shut." The thing that had been Pell took a step down the tunnel toward us, and Halverson moved to slam the door. The old instinct, the foreman's instinct, seal the breach, protect the count, and I caught his arm. I don't know why. I think it was because I had spent 5 days learning that the easy slam of a door was how every cruelty in this place had begun. I think I could not bear to watch us do it one more time, even to the dead. "Wait," I said. "Just—" But I had no end to the sentence. There was no mercy to offer the thing that had been Pell. It was past mercy. The man who had sealed Elias behind a pantry bolt had himself been sealed out by us, and had died at his own door in the cold, and was now this. There was a justice in it so exact and so horrible that it felt designed, and I have never since been able to believe fully in a world without some terrible arithmetic running underneath it. "It can't be mercy now," Elias said gently to me, the freed man teaching the girl who freed him. "Some doors you can't reopen. He's not Pell. Pell died out here listening to us breathe. This is just the door he left open, walking." He put his thin hand over mine where it gripped Halverson's arm, and he loosened it gently. "Let them close it. This time it's right. This time it's the only mercy there is." And so Halverson swung the blast door shut on the thing that had been Pell and the others on the ground and the cold living night, and worked the wheel until the bolt seated with that jaw-click sound. And this time the sealing of the door was not a cruelty. It was a burial. We stood in the tunnel and listened to the slow hands find the steel outside and tap against it, patient, patient. The same taps I'd heard through the third door on the first night. And I understood at last that I had been hearing the same sound, in one form or another, since the moment we arrived. The sound of someone shut out, asking to be let in. We carried Elias back into the main room, all of us shaking, and for a long time no one could speak. The lantern hissed. The generator was off, and the knowledge sat among us, heavy as a body. We had not been the rescuers who stumbled on a bunker. We had been a link in a chain of people doing arithmetic on each other, and our link had killed 3 souls at their own threshold without our ever knowing we'd done it. "We didn't know," Devin kept saying. "We couldn't have known. There were teeth in the dark. Anyone would have sealed the door." "That's what Pell said about Elias," Priya answered very quietly, and Devin stopped saying it. That was the moment our little community fractured, not in rage, but in grief, because grief that has nowhere to go turns and looks for an owner, and the eyes slowly found me. I want to be fair about this because they were not monsters, and I have had years to understand them. I was the one who had heard the taps on the first night and said nothing. If I had spoken, then if I had made them believe we might have opened the third door on day one, freed Elias on day one, learned about Pell's return on day one, in time to leave the blast door open, in time for the Reyes', in time. My silence in those first 4 days had a price, and the price had been paid by 3 people dying in the cold at a sealed door. The arithmetic I had hated in everyone else turned out to include me. I had a number too, and it was 3. You heard him the first night, Halverson said. Not cruelly. That was almost the worst of it. He said it like a man reading a count off a clipboard. If you'd made me listen, you wouldn't have listened, I said. You told me it was pipes. But even as I said the old true thing, I knew it had stopped being enough. It was true that they hadn't believed me. It was also true that I had stopped trying to make them, that I had let the silence become comfortable, that I had wanted to give them rest more than I'd wanted to give them truth. Both things were true. That is the lesson the bunker taught me that I have never been able to put down. That they wouldn't have believed me, and I stopped trying to be believed can be true at the same time. And that the space between them is exactly the size of 3 graves. It doesn't matter whose fault, Ruth said. And her old voice cut through us. Listen to me. All of you. This is how it happened to them. Exactly this. The food got short, and they got frightened, and they found someone to make it be his fault, and they did arithmetic, and they slid a bolt. It starts as blame. It ends as a door. She looked around at each of us and last at me, and her eyes were not unkind. If we do to this child what Pell did to Elias, if we decide her life weighs less because of what her silence cost, then we are the bunker. Then nothing we did at the third door meant anything at all. Nobody answered her. But I watched the eyes leave me one by one, not because I was forgiven, but because they had each seen, in Ruth's words, the bolt in their own hand and been frightened of it. Elias spoke from his blankets, hoarse and certain. The bunker doesn't kill people, he said. Fear and account, and someone to blame, that's what kills people down here. I've had a long time in the dark to learn it. You want to survive this place? Not the food, not the door. You survive each other. That's the only thing that was ever going to get any of us out alive. We did not stay much longer. That surprised me. After everything, after the 40 days Priya had counted, after the steel and the light, and the safest room in the dead world. But you cannot live in a tomb you have helped to fill, and we all knew it without a vote. The bunker had become a place where the truth of us was written on every door, and a person can only stand in a room like that for so long before they have to walk out into the cold just to be able to breathe. Elias was the one who couldn't leave, and the one who had to. He was too weak to travel, his body wrecked by the weeks of dark and hunger. And the bunker was his. He'd built it, welded its doors, drawn its plans in the years before. By every right, it was his to keep. But he looked at it now the way I imagine a man looks at a house where someone he loved was murdered, and I understood that staying would kill him slower, but just as surely as leaving. You should take it, he told Halverson. It works. It's safe as anything is. The count's good for a long time without me eating into it. His attempt at the dead laugh again, and again it wouldn't come. I built it to keep people alive. Somebody should let it do that. We're not leaving you in here alone, I said. Not in this. Never again. And here is where the resolution of our story turned out to be a thing I never could have predicted on the first night, when I thought the choice was only ever open the door or don't. We did not extract Elias to safety. We did not fortify the bunker and hold it. We did not flee and leave him. We did something I have no clean word for even now. We stayed long enough to make him strong enough to choose. Priya rationed his recovery as carefully as she'd rationed the cans, building him back from broth to solid food over days. And the count she had once used to measure who was too expensive, she now used to measure how to keep a starved man alive. Halverson and Devon went up top in daylight, when the dead were slow and few, and learned the land around the door, not to flee it, and not to hold it, but to know it, the way you have to know any place you mean to be honest about. Ruth sat with Elias and taught him, slowly, how to bear the size of a room again, the presence of other people again, the unbearable mercy of being looked at and not erased. And me, the kid, who heard the taps first and stayed silent and learned what silence costs. I did the thing I had failed to do on the first night, over and over, every day, until it became the only thing I trusted myself to do. I said the true thing out loud. When the food was short and Devon got frightened and started, just barely started, to look at Elias's portion the way Pell once had, I said it out loud before it could become a bolt. When Halverson wanted to seal a side passage we hadn't explored, sealing being his oldest instinct, I made him say what he was afraid was behind it before he shut it. I appointed myself, without anyone asking, the one who would not let the silence get comfortable again. It was the only penance I had, and the only protection. We left in the end, all 7 of us. We left the blast door open behind us, Elias insisted, and we all understood why, and none of us could have borne to seal it one more time, so that if anyone came after us, cold and frightened and locked out of the only safe place in the world, the door would open to their hand. We walked up into a gray morning, and behind us the bunker breathed its coin-warm dark into the open air, and we did not look back at it, because there are some doors you can only survive by walking away from. I am older now, and I have been part of other groups in other shelters through other winters, and I have learned that the bunker was not a place I escaped, but a thing I carry. Every group I have ever been in has a third door, every one. It is the door behind which we put the person we have decided costs too much, the slow one, the sick one, the one whose face reminds us of our own fear. We do not always use a pantry bowl. Sometimes a bolt is just a silence everyone agrees to keep. Sometimes it is a count, a number that eats, an arithmetic of love that has gotten its columns confused. But it is always there, in every room of frightened people, and I have made it my life's single discipline to find it before someone slides it shut. I think about Elias, who built a fortress against the dead and was nearly destroyed by the living inside it. I think about Pell, who did monstrous arithmetic and then died at his own threshold by the same kind of arithmetic, performed by us, who never knew his name until he was no longer a man. I think about the 3 of them standing in the cold for days outside a sealed door, listening to strangers breathe in the place they'd built, and I understand that the thing that ended the world was not the dead at all. The dead were only ever a mirror. The thing that ended the world was the speed with which frightened people decide that someone else is the problem and reach for the door. And I think about my own silence on the first night, which I have never forgiven and never will, and which I have made into the only useful thing I own. 3 people died because I found it easier to let the others rest than to make them face what I knew. I will not pretend that guilt has a tidy shape. It does not resolve. It does not lift. I did not learn to put it down. I learned to carry it forward, to let it make me into the person at every threshold who says the hard, true thing out loud while it can still change something before the silence sets, before the count decides, before the bolt slides home. That is not redemption. I don't believe in redemption anymore. The bunker took that from me. It is only the shape a person can make out of a wound so that the wound does some good. Elias is still alive, last I knew, in a settlement to the west, where they have, of all things, no walls, only an agreement, renewed each morning out loud about who they will refuse to become. He built that place too. A man who learned the hard way that the strongest steel in the world cannot keep out the only thing that ever really kills you, which is the moment you decide a frightened stranger at your door is worth less than your comfort. I visit when I can, and we do not talk much about the dark. We sit, and we are looked at and not erased, and for both of us, that is still the rarest and most expensive thing the world has to offer. Halverson died 2 winters after, holding a door open for people he didn't know, which is the only ending I could ever have wanted for him. Priya stopped counting cans and started teaching people how to share them. Ruth went in her sleep praying, I'm told, with her hands folded the way I first saw her on that bunk. And Devon's scared laugh somewhere out there is still going. And I hope it never stops, because a man who laughs when he's afraid is a man who hasn't yet decided to slide the bolt. That is all of it. That is the bunker we found, that had been opened from inside, and what it taught me about which doors are opened by mercy and which are closed by fear, and how rarely, how terribly rarely, we can tell the difference in time. People ask me, when they hear I survived those years, what the trick of it was. They want a number, a count, a wall, a weapon. They want the kind of answer Priya used to give, the kind that lets you sleep. I never have one for them, and I watched the disappointment land, the way I once watched it land on the others' faces when the kids said something they didn't want to hear. The trick, if there was one, is that I stopped believing the danger was ever outside the door. The dead never schemed. They never did arithmetic. They never decided anyone was too expensive to keep alive. Only we did that. Only the living ever sealed a man behind steel and called it mercy, or sealed 3 out in the cold and called it safety. So now I keep no count. I build no walls I cannot open from either side. And every morning, in whatever room of frightened people I find myself, I look for the 3rd door before anyone reaches for the bolt, and I say, out loud while it still matters, the true thing I once swallowed in the dark. That is the whole of what I learned. Some doors are opened by mercy. Most are closed by fear. Be the one who knows which is which in time.